is without a doubt the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
All right, welcome back to the Mark Cox Show. Playing a little Ron Burgundy there to talk about this Major League Soccer stadium I was joking about, well, not joking about at the top of the show. I pointed out in my little rant today on the soapbox that, I don't like soccer. So there are people out there that don't like football, and there are people out there that don't like hockey or whatever the case may be. But why in the world would this city spend $200 million, with a big chunk of that being subsidized by the taxpayer, on a stadium to bring in a Major League Soccer team when we already have a stadium that's now not being used and a huge practice facility out in Earth City that's not being used? These things just don't make any sense to me. Our guest right now is Michael Highsmith from the Show Me Institute. ShowMeInstitute.org is their website. I know this is not the issue, Michael, that you came in here prepared to talk about today, but in general, we have talked about public financing of sports stadiums in the past, and it's not always a good return on your money, is it?
No, absolutely.
Oops.
Oh, is that good? All right.
No, wait, our mic's not up. Here we go. Go ahead.
Hey, Mark. Well, first off, thanks for having me in the studio.
It's all right.
So, yeah, I mean, as far as the MLS stadium goes, it would definitely be welcome in St. Louis. This kind of thing, me personally, I'm a soccer fan, so I would enjoy seeing it. But you have to look at these kind of things from an economic standpoint, and you have to think about how much it's going to bring to the city. And you look at other stadiums and all these past studies that have been done on it, and the overwhelming amount of research shows that sports stadiums do not bring economic development to a city.
Well, whatever development it brings is temporary. I mean, you got some construction workers are employed for the 18 months it takes to build it. Then that goes away. And then if you've given tax increment financing or whatever incentives have been given or bonds have been issued to finance the stadium, you're not seeing the benefits of it, really, because you have to subtract all of that from whatever revenues made from the team on a yearly basis,
right, exactly,
for a long time.
Those are some costs you definitely have to take into account. And if you look at St. Louis in the past, I know my colleague Graham Renz has come on and talked about this. The St. Louis Development Corporation released a study that found in the past 15 years, St. Louis has spent over $700 million through tax abatement and tax increment financing. So that's a significant chunk of change that is depleting the tax revenue in the city.
Yeah, that shouldn't be the reason somebody's going to locate their venue in your town. We need to move away from that. We're just robbing Peter to pay Paul in a lot of cases. Let's talk about the Centene Clayton expansion project. This is something that's been on the radar at Show Me Institute for a while now, because I know we've talked about it in the past. Mm-hmm. So what's going on now?
Yeah, we've been following Centene's proposal for a long time now, and what we're looking at right here is the perfect example of when municipalities feel that they're pitted against one another and they have to offer subsidies for a developer, and it ends up in the city missing out on a lot of revenues. So again, this is tax abatement. So what happened earlier this week was the Clayton Board of Aldermen met, and they approved $75 million over the next 20 years for Centene and to relocate its expansion inside of Clayton. And so what this is going to do is it's going to relocate a couple jobs from around Chesterfield, Town and Country, throughout the state of Missouri, throughout St. Louis, and it's going to consolidate them inside of Clayton.
Right.
You're
just moving the money around.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's the city putting up public dollars, taxpayer dollars, in order to move jobs across a municipal line, and it's not going to create regional growth at all.
Are there any new jobs involved in it?
Yeah, so they're planning on creating 1,000 new jobs, but when you're thinking about these, you have to take into account not necessarily what jobs will be created, but you have to take into account what the city's missing out on by giving these subsidies. So they're planning on creating 1,000 jobs, but you look at Centene, it's the fourth fastest growing, or last year it was rated by Fortune the fourth fastest growing company in the nation. Mm-hmm. You look at Clayton, it's got a vacancy rate half that of St. Louis City. It's not exactly struggling for investment. And any public dollars that are put towards this are potential public dollars that are lost out of the tax base.
Yep. It's similar to the stadium concept we talked about a minute ago. And I mean, I know they're not competing with another local municipality to get that sports stadium, but my comment was more directly on the incentives that we're giving away to attract
Right. And
Fortune
I think,
500 businesses and other kind of business to the area.
Yeah, and this is honestly the epitome of this. The Board of Aldermen, multiple members actually spoke out against the tax incentives, and yet it was approved unanimously. Every single Board of Aldermen voted yes for these tax incentives, despite the fact that some of them acknowledged that these things don't spur economic development.
Yeah, I'm thinking out loud here. And in Ellisville out there, they had that argument over whether TIF financing should be given away to a Walmart supercenter, which wanted to develop. And there was a big battle between the politicians in the city. Mayor Adam Paul is the one who ended up winning that battle because he was opposed to the TIF financing. They're still going to end up developing that site, but they're not doing it through TIF financing. And they don't have much open retail space left in that city. They've done an admirable job of filling these things up without having to give away the farm, so to speak.
Right, and that's the biggest issue with a lot of these is the but-for test, which is essentially saying a developer has to prove that they will not come to this area but for the subsidies that are on the table for them. Mm-hmm. And a lot of studies have shown that this but-for clause doesn't necessarily, it's not accurate. There's a lot of times where even without the subsidies, business would take place, and any public dollars that are spent towards that are less public dollars for schools, for other important municipal services.
That's Michael Highsmith. He's with the Show Me Institute. The state auditor took a look at sunshine requests around the state. Now, the sunshine law simply means that, if a group meets, an elected group meets, and there's a quorum, and it needs to be open to the public needs to have access to that information unless they go into closed session, things like that. That's kind of what the sunshine law says. You can't keep the media out if there's a public meeting that's going on. What did the auditor find?
Yeah, so the report found some troubling results, actually. A lot of citizens should be concerned about this. It found that more than 2/3 of all the municipalities and all the taxing districts that they contacted did not properly follow the sunshine law. They didn't provide the documents that they were supposed to provide, or they charged excessive fees for it, or they waited past the 3-day period to provide these documents. And in this test, it was very simple documents that were requested. It was just minutes from last year, a couple other documents. But overall, the idea behind this was that there would be next to no hassle behind the municipality finding these documents.
Right.
But a lot of governments did not comply behind this. And so when you look at this, the big issue is sunshine is the best disinfectant. This is what can stop any kind of back-end deals, any corruption. Public citizens should have access to public records. And it seems like a lot of times the municipalities aren't following this law.
And a lot of times it's just ignorance, which is kind of hard to believe, but I think that, I remember back to my days as a reporter where I tried to get, specifically, I remember trying to get into a meeting at a school, and the principal coming out and telling me I had no right to be there. And I said, "Is it a public meeting?" And he said, "Yes." I'm like, well, according to the sunshine law, which I happened to have a copy of,
right,
and showed it to him, I have a right to be here if all of those people have a right to be here. So in a lot of cases, it's ignorance, and it's just people who aren't familiar with the law. But for elected bodies, they have a responsibility to understand how this works.
Yeah, there's absolutely, you can definitely argue the case that maybe there's a lack of education on how the sunshine law works. But the bottom line is more than 2/3 of these municipalities didn't properly respond to that. And that should, in and of itself, it should raise a couple eyebrows.
2/3, absolutely. Go to your city hall and ask them for a copy of the sunshine laws. They ought to know it. They should. That's a shame. I'd love to say. I'm going to have to go on and read the story on your website and find out which cities were included in that. Did she call them out?
Yeah, there's a list of the roughly 4,000 taxing districts or municipalities that report to the state auditor. They sampled 300. Obviously, it would have been a huge hassle to sample every single one.
Right.
But of those 300, less than 100 properly complied.
That's sad. That's sad. Michael Highsmith, thanks for your time. ShowMeInstitute.org is the website. Go on there, read about some of these issues and much more. Have a great weekend.
Hey, you too, Mark.
Thanks for being with us. We appreciate that. When we come back, we are going to talk to Bill Eigel, state senator-elect out in St. Charles County. He's been sitting in on some planning sessions for the upcoming legislative session here in Missouri. So I want to pick his brain over what they're thinking about doing with all of their new power they're going to have down in Jeff City. And then Tim Jones, former House Speaker, has been in Washington, D.C., and he has some insight from the Congress and the Senate on maybe where they're going when they get back from this lame duck session and they have a new president in Washington. All that and more coming up on the Marc Cox Show.
There's a whistle up above and people pushing, people shoving, and the girls who try to look pretty.
This hour of the Marc Cox Show brought to you by Thomas Helbig, the official St. Louis financial advisor of the Marc Cox Show.
Ever had trouble finding a taxi? Me too. That's why I used Uber on a recent trip to Texas. The ride-sharing service was easy to use, comfortable, and affordable. But in Missouri, it may not have been possible at all. That's because taxi cab regulators in Kansas City and St. Louis don't like companies like Uber and have filed suit to stop them. They control the number of cabs and prices that are charged, supposedly to ensure safety and supply and demand. What they really want to do is eliminate any competition. But competition is a good thing. Innovative companies should not be penalized for providing a needed service. Sure, ride-sharing services should be safe and drivers licensed, but are other regulations like huge insurance fees really necessary? More rides can mean better service, lower prices, and plenty of jobs for drivers.